Hi there, my name is Andy Cook, and I'm part of the staff here at Panama Baptist Church. I'm really glad you're able to join us today. This is a series about identity. And in part one of our series, we talked about how do people go about determining their core identity. And I made the observation that if you don't get your identity vertically, by that I mean you get it from God, let God say this is who you are at your core, then you're going to look for it elsewhere. And you'll probably look for it horizontally in terms of like your roles, the tribes, that's the people that you hang out with, your performances, accomplishments like that, or you'll look for it internally through your preferences. In part two, we talked about the 4 parts of every Jesus follower's core identity. And I made the statement that at your core, you are an image bearer, right? You are a lion tamer, you are God's friend, and you are a body part. Well, this is part 3. And in part 3, we're going to look at the connection between identity and habits. Plus, why is it so hard to change our habits, and what can we do to make that a little bit easier? So that's where we're going to be in just a few minutes. When our kids were young, we had a few household rules, and our kids knew exactly what those rules were, and they also knew the consequences for disobeying any of those household rules. And so, if they disobeyed them, they got caught, then the consequences were administered to them. Well, no surprise there. Where it was a little bit challenging for me as a parent is when, let's say, my kids disobeyed 2 of the rules, or perhaps all 3 of them at the same time. And so now the consequences would stack up, and I didn't really want to administer that much discipline. And so sometimes I would say to them, look, this is what you did. This is what you deserved. And they're like, yep. Dad's going to give you mercy. And mercy was code for you're going to get less than what you deserve, right? You're not going to get all the discipline that you deserve. So one day, my son Jonathan had broken some rules, and I can't even tell you which ones, but the punishment would have stacked up pretty good for him. And he looked at me and he said, Dad, today would be a good day for mercy. Yeah. I have days like that too, when I want to go to my Father in heaven and say, God in heaven, today would be a good day for mercy. That's awesome when you get to give mercy. It's awesome when you get to receive mercy. But what would you say to someone who's already received a lot of mercy or a lot of grace to motivate them to change their ways? In other words, what would you say to someone who every time they disobeyed or whatever, they're like, today would be a good day for mercy. They got the little puppy dog look in their eyes, right? What would you say? If you want to motivate them to change their ways, would you warn them that the grace or the mercy might just run out? Maybe. So it's kind of a similar situation going on in the book of Romans. Paul explained to the Romans that God had been gracious to them in bringing them back from the dead spiritually, and that the more that they realized how sinful they were, the more obvious God's grace really is, and that the more they realized what God's rules were, the more they had seen God's grace. This is Romans chapter 5, verse 20. It says, but where sin multiplied, in other words, where they recognized that they had more and more sin, grace multiplied even more, so that just as sin reigned in death, so also grace will reign through righteousness, resulting in eternal life through Jesus Christ our Lord. And that led to a question then, right? If as they had more sin, grace multiplied even more, and God was given an amazing credit and praise for being so gracious, it led to a question. This is chapter 6, verse 1. What should we say then? Should we continue in sin so that grace may multiply? Right? That's a good question. Answer, very straightforward. Paul nails it. He says, absolutely not. Back to what I talked about with my son John. Can you imagine? He looks at me and he says, Dad, should I just keep disobeying so that you can give me even more mercy and become known as the most merciful dad in all of greater Panama, New York? Absolutely not, right? No, absolutely not. The answer doesn't shock us. But the reasoning, the explanation is quite surprising. We're going to look at it in just a second, but I want you to notice when we look at Paul's explanation as to why we shouldn't continue to sin, notice that Paul does not say, don't sin because God's going to change his mind about being gracious if you do. Paul doesn't say, do not keep sinning because the mercy does have a limit and you will reach it. Paul doesn't say, don't sin because if you do, God's going to disown you. Paul doesn't say, don't sin because if you do, then God's going to take away your salvation and you'll no longer be his child. He doesn't say any of that. Catch what he does say and how he explains to them why he would say so strongly, absolutely not. Here it is, Romans chapter 6, verse 2. Absolutely not. How can we who died to sin still live in it? Or are you unaware that all of us who were baptized into Christ Jesus were baptized into his death? Therefore, we were buried with him by baptism into death, in order that just as Christ was raised from the dead by the glory of the Father, so we too may walk in newness of life. For if we've been united with him in the likeness of death, we'll certainly be also in the likeness of his resurrection. For we know that our old self was crucified, that's key, with him, so that the body ruled by sin might be rendered powerless, so that we may no longer be enslaved to sin, since a person who has died is freed from sin. Now, if we've died with Christ, we believe that we'll also live with him, because we know that Christ, having been raised from the dead, will not die again. Now, death no longer rules over him, for the death he died to sin once for all time. But the life he lives to God. So you too consider yourselves dead to sin and alive to God in Christ Jesus. Elsewhere, when Paul was speaking to the Galatians, he just gave his own testimony about this same idea. He said this, Galatians 2:20, I've been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. The life I now live in the body, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. Here's the explanation that Paul gave to those Romans who were asking the question, hypothetically at least, should we keep on sinning so that grace will multiply even more and so that God will get all this praise and glory and credit for being the most gracious God ever? Paul's explanation was this: don't sin because that isn't who you are. You no longer are a slave to sin. You, or we could say it this way, no longer do what you used to do, sin, because you no longer are who you used to be, a slave to sin. Jesus follower, listen to me. Slave to sin is no longer part of your core ID. It's been replaced by God's friend, right? We didn't talk about it when we were going through this core ID earlier, but really and truly, all humans at their core are slave to sin until God intervenes. But for you who are Jesus followers, slave to sin is no longer part of your core ID. It's been replaced. You have a brand new ID, and that new identity needs to be lived out. Now, there's a Bible word for that: sanctification. Sanctification. Sanctification is the process of becoming who you already are. It's a transformation in which behavior catches up with your identity, right? You are a saint, that's who you are, but you and I often are not living like saints, right? Our behavior has not caught up with our identity yet. And sanctification is the name we give to the process, the name we give to that transformation in which our behavior is slowly catching up with our new identity. Sanctification largely takes place through identity-based habits, and we're going to talk about that in a minute, and through Christian community. So the idea is this: what Paul is saying to us is, let your identity determine your habits. Your old identity was slave to sin, but that's not who you are anymore. So don't keep the same habitual sins that you used to have when you had your old identity. Let your new identity determine and drive your brand new habits. All right, so let's continue with what Paul's saying there in Romans chapter 6, and you will see that he says to you and to me, all right, since you're no longer who you used to be, now let's live that out through the habits. Let's make a habit of offering your parts to God to do his will, your body parts, your mind, your hands, right, your heart, everything that makes you you. All right, Romans chapter 6, verse 12, he continues, therefore, do not let sin reign in your mortal body so that you obey its desires. And do not offer any parts of it, your body, to sin as weapons for unrighteousness, but as those who are alive from the dead, offer yourselves to God and all the parts of yourselves to God as weapons for righteousness. For sin will not rule over you because you are not under the law but under grace. What then? Should we sin because we're not under the law but under grace? Absolutely not. Don't you know that if you offer yourselves to someone as obedient slaves, you are slaves of that one you obey, either of sin leading to death or of obedience leading to righteousness. But thank God that although you used to be slaves of sin, you obeyed from the heart that pattern of teaching to which you were handed over. And having been set free from sin, you became enslaved to righteousness. Now, I'm using a human analogy because of the weakness of your flesh. For just as you offered the parts of yourselves as slaves to impurity and to greater and greater lawlessness, so now offer them as slaves to righteousness, which results in sanctification. For when you were slaves of sin, you were free with regard to righteousness. So what fruit was produced then from the things you are now ashamed of? The outcome of those things is death. But now, since you've been set free from sin and have become enslaved to God, you have your fruit, which results in sanctification, and the outcome is eternal life. So Paul's saying to us, listen, you have a brand new identity. You are God's friend. You used to be slave to sin, but now you're God's friend. Now live that out habitually by making a habit of offering your parts to God to do His will. So start with your identity, right? God's friend, and reinforce that through actions that become habits. And Paul explains that this is the path to sanctification, which is what your brand new heart that you haven't got longs for. Your heart wants to be sanctified. He also points out at the end the outcome of this pathway of going through this transformation and cooperating with God, as you live out this new identity by building actions that lead to habits. It results in eternal life and it results in freedom. That is awesome. So that's Paul explaining to us the link between identity and our habits. I want to step aside from that for just a moment and look at some of the work that James Clear talks about with the same idea. James Clear is a present-day authority on habits, and he writes this in his book Atomic Habits. Changing our habits is challenging for two reasons. One, we try to change the wrong thing, and two, we try to change our habits the wrong way. Let's focus on the first of those two. We try to change the wrong thing. James explains that there are three layers of behavior change, right? A change in your outcomes, a change in your processes, or a change in your identity. So like a change in your outcomes, that would be like I lose weight. That's the outcome. If I diet and I exercise or whatever, the outcome is I lose weight. There's a change in your processes. Those are the things that you do, the habits, right? I exercise, I diet or whatever. And then change in your identity is the innermost one. This is a change in the belief about the type of person that you are, who you are at your core. James continues. Many people begin the process of changing their habits by focusing on what they want to achieve. And this leads to outcome-based habits, right? I want to lose 20 pounds. Right? The alternative is to build identity-based habits. And with this approach, we start by focusing on who we wish to become. I wish to become a recreational athlete, or I wish to become a reader. The goal isn't to read 5 books a year. The goal is to become a reader. That's what he's differentiating here. So it addresses the same things, but the order is different, right? With outcome-based habits, we start at the outside with a goal and we try to work that in by setting the goal and then trying to change some processes, hoping that eventually it'll change who we are. James says, no, work the other way out. Start at the inside, right, with who you are, and change what you believe about who you are, and then work to create habits that will reinforce that identity, who you are, and that's going to change your outcomes. He continues, true behavior change is identity change. Anyone can convince themselves to visit the gym or eat healthy once or twice, but if you don't shift the belief behind the behavior, then it's hard to stick with it long-term changes. Right? Improvements are only temporary until they become part of who you are. Every action you take is a vote for the type of person you wish to become. Now, this vote, in other words, what he's saying is when I perform an action, let's say I read 5 pages in my Bible today, that casts a vote, a believable vote for I am the kind of person who reads God's word and spends time with God every day. If I do it tomorrow, that's another vote. If I do it the next day, that's another vote. And the more votes I have, the more believable it is that I am that type of person that I say that I am or am becoming. So James admonishes us to start by answering, who is the type of person you want to become? And then, with that clearly answered, move on to the second question, which is, what is one habit that casts a small vote for becoming that type of person? So use identity-based habits to reinforce ID, who it is that we want to become, because, as James has noted from the research, changing identity is the most effective way to change behavior. The most effective way, according to research, to change our behavior is to change what we believe about who we are, change our identity. Now, an example of how I'm working on this in my own life. I instead of being, a person who says, "Boy, I should exercise more," I am instead focusing on, I'm the type of person who receives active time as a gift from God. I'm God's friend, and so one of the things that God does for me as his friend is every day he gives me time to be active. I call it active time, you could call it exercise time, but I'm the type of person who receives that as a gift. And so when it's time to ride my bike or go for a walk or whatever, I look at it and I can start by saying, God, thank you so much that I have this time again today, and there's nowhere else I need to be. There's nothing else I should be doing. This is a gift from you. Thank you so much for giving this to me. This is a life-giving gift. So I'm starting in that example, right? I'm starting with who it is that I am. I am God's friend. And I'm the type of friend that receives gifts from God and says thank you for them. And I'm receiving active time or exercise time as a gift from my friend, God. If I do that, if that's the mentality that I nurture, and then I go out and I cast believable votes for that by saying thank you as I'm putting my shoes on and then head out the door and do that day after day, I'm casting believable votes for this person that I am. I am the type of person who's God's friend and receives this active time as a gift from God. If, on the other hand, I go the other way and I go, you know what, I just should exercise more. As soon as I say that, what I'm really saying is, I'm the kind of person who should do things, but I don't often do what I should do, so I'm probably a pretty undisciplined person. Now, if that's what I believe about myself, which might be true, by the way, but if I believe that, how difficult will it be for me to truly make exercise a lasting part of my lifestyle? That's the point that James is making, is that we don't make lasting change when we start with the outcome or when we start even with a habit. We make lasting change when we start with letting our new identity, who it is we want to become, drive the habits that will then eventually produce outcomes. So let me put these two ideas together, right? Identity is a great way to determine which habits you want to build, and habits are a great way to reinforce your identity. There's a link here. These two go together, right? The identity helps us know which habits we need, but habits reinforce our identity by casting these believable votes for the fact that we are who it is we are wanting to become or who we actually are. Now, I also want to do a quick aside for you and differentiate between what the Apostle Paul and James Clear are saying. The Apostle Paul is explaining how to become who we truly are by using habits, right? Sanctification is about becoming who you really are. You really are a saint. You really are God's friend, right? James Clear is explaining how to become who we hope to be by using habits. And for those of you who've been around the Bible for quite a long time for fun, you might want to do this. Try to tie this all together with what the Apostle James wrote about when he talks about faith and works. How does faith and works play into this becoming who you are and all of that? That's a really fun thing to work through in your mind. I'm going to state it this way. Here's the big idea for today. And if you catch nothing else, catch this. Our core identity is reinforced and lived out by our habits. Our core identity is reinforced and lived out by our habits. Both parts are true. So we can say it this way. If you want to truly believe that you are an image bearer, lion tamer, not God, God's friend, and a body part, and you want these parts of your ID to remain core, then you'll have to vote for these IDs through actions that become habits. Does that make sense? If you really want to believe that you are an image bearer and a lion tamer and all that, and you want those parts of your core ID to remain the core and not get displaced by something else, you're going to have to vote for those IDs through actions that become habits. So as we think about the various parts of our core ID, right? The question is, what is one habit that would cast a small vote for that particular aspect of our core ID? For example, I'm an image bearer, right? What is one habit that would cast a small vote for me being an image bearer? As we go through these various parts of our core ID, I'm going to give you a few examples of habits, small habits that you could do. I'm not asking you to adopt those habits. What I'm asking you to do is to consider the question, what's a small habit that I could do, that you could do, that would cast a believable vote for you being that? What is a small habit you could do that would reinforce that as your core identity? So for image bearer, here's one I've been thinking about. For me, the focus is more on me remembering that it's not just me, but all the rest of you are image bearers, and you have that dignity in you and worth. And so one way to do that, to reinforce that, a habit is this. It's to ask others for what I desire. You're like, what? Yeah, so in other words, if I would really wish that you would do something for me, ask you. You're like, whoa, how does that, making that a habit, how does that reinforce that you think I'm an image bearer? Because this, if I ask you for what I desire, I'm not just hoping, I'm not in any way going to try to manipulate you, right? I'm not going to try to trick you into it. I'm not going to try to extract it out of you. I'm asking you. And when I ask you, I'm asking you in a way that is giving you perfect opportunity to say yes or to say no. I'm affirming that you are a person who is worthy of me giving you choice and me not trying to in any way manipulate you or do anything to get you to want to do what I want you to do apart from your own choice and your own goodwill. And so as I do that, if I make that my habit of asking you for what I desire that you'll do and then allowing you to choose, I'm reinforcing in my mind, you are an image bearer. We said last week that I am a lion tamer. I had you read it with me, right, and say it with me. I am a lion tamer. Well, what's a habit that would cast a small vote for you being a lion tamer? I've got one idea. Adopt a cause in which you make the world better or you undo the effects of sin, right? You pick a cause that you can plug into that fits both your passion and your abilities and your resources, and you do that. And as you do that, engage in addressing that cause, addressing that issue, making the world better, undoing the effects of sin, you are reinforcing this idea that you are a lion tamer. You keep on going. I am not God. So what's a habit that I could adopt that would cast a vote for my belief, my understanding that I am not God? I am God's friend. What's a habit that I could adopt that would cast a vote for me being God's friend? I thought immediately of Grace Bomb in this category, where I'm loading, but I'm listening to God. I'm like, God, you and me, it's anybody you want a Grace Bomb today, right? If I grace bomb, or at least if I listen, I load and I listen, and I'm prepared to let her go. As I do that, I am, through that habit, casting a vote for my core identity as God's friend. I'm a body part. What's one habit that I could adopt that would cast a small vote for me being a body part? You could come up with examples. I gave you several here just to consider. Let's wrap this up. As you think through your core identity, think through maybe some of your other identities that maybe are not core, the roles that you have, the groups that you're part of. Which identities did you cast a vote for this week? I encourage you to think about that. Which identities did you cast a vote for this week? You did some action. Maybe you had a habit, but it cast a vote for it. It gave evidence to the fact that this is your identity. Which identities did you act on and maybe have a habit for, cast a vote for this week? And then secondly, who are you already, but definitely still need to work at becoming? Is there something that the Holy Spirit is just impressing on you? Like, this is an area where you're not behaviorally what you are in status. Who are you already, but still need to work at becoming? I encourage you to think about these two things, and then we'll be ready to jump on this more next week, because next week we're going to talk about how do you actually build those habits, right? And specifically, how do you build habits that reinforce your core identity? I look forward to sharing that with you in part 4.